Good morning. We are here to talk about some tariffs. Who's excited? Who's excited? If you skipped that day in high school on the Smoot-Hawley tariff experience, then no worries. I've got you covered here today. And obviously a little bit of dramatization there. I don't think anybody studied the Smoot-Hawley tariffs in high school. I know that I certainly did not. So that being said, we did study it in college. I was an economics major, and I'm here to talk to you and give you a little bit of an economic standpoint on tariffs and what's going on and what we can anticipate here in the future, and maybe how we can either get ahead of the game or adapt to the game here. Now, today we're going to be talking about tariffs. I do want to let you know I'm going to do my best here to not be political about tariffs. That being said, that's all they are, is politics. All tariffs are a political weapon that people are trying to use both domestically and for foreign policy here. So we are going to look at what are tariffs? Are they good or are they bad? Why is it such a dirty word to economists here? And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the unintended consequences of this. And the best way to look at that is through historical examples here. So we're going to take a few historical examples here, and then we are going to get to, hey, what can we expect if Trump actually enacts some of these tariffs? And what can maybe you do to get ahead of the game or adapt a little bit better to this game? So tons of fun stuff going on right now. I do want to preface this podcast with a few things. Number one, I am not an economist, even though I did study economics in undergrad, and even though I absolutely love the subject, I'm fascinated by it. I am not a PhD in economics, and there are some phenomenal podcasts out there. As a matter of fact, I'm just going to go ahead and shout out one podcast right now that I actually re-listened to this morning. They did one Trump's first term, and they re-interviewed the economist in this here recently. It's called Worst Tariffs Ever. It's a Planet Money podcast here, and they do a much better job than I do explaining what tariffs are and the effects of it. So today, my goal is not to get super into the weeds here, but stay high level on what the tariffs are, why they're causing such a fuss here, and what you can expect and how you can adapt to them. So without further ado, let's hop right on in here, right? So what is a tariff? Hey, at its core, it's basically a tax imposed on the government for goods and services imported from other countries here. And the primary purpose of these tariffs here are to make imported goods more expensive, thereby stimulating domestic economies here, right? So it's a great way to protect local industries here and local jobs. But on the other hand, it does make prices overall more expensive here. So are they good or are they bad? It really depends on which side of the aisle that you're sitting on. If you are in the steel industry and there's a tariff that helps that taxes steel imports from other countries, you're loving it. But if you are the ones that are making the cars, you're hating it because now all of a sudden the steel that you've got to get is going to be more expensive. So what do you have to do? You now have to bump up your price to make up for those extra costs that you are incurring on the cost of goods that you buy. And now all of a sudden, those costs are getting passed down to me and you who are buying cars, the end consumer. So one thing that I think is super important to know is that when you charge a tariff, the idea is to incentivize behavior, right? But the way they incentivize behavior is by making things more expensive. And the citizen of the country who imposes that tariff is the one that pays it, right? So when we put a flat 25% tariff on Mexico or on Canada, they aren't paying the tariff, okay? They are not paying that tariff. You and I are paying that tariff, right? So in general, it's just an additional tax. And some might call it an additional sales tax. And I think that might be a decent way of looking at it. But the idea here, okay, if well, so how does it affect Canada and Mexico? Well, hey, if all of a sudden, let's use a better example. Let's say let's say France, and you are a big believer in Bordeaux and you love French wine, right? Well, guess what? If French wine all of a sudden becomes 25% more expensive, that California Cabernet is going to be looking really good. All right. Well, okay. So that then there affects the California wine industry. And all of a sudden we're keeping wine inside the states. And the California wine industry is going to be very happy with a 25% tariff on French wine. That being said, you may not like California cabs. They may be a little bit too jammy for you. Maybe you do like the French Bordeaux's here, right? Well, for you, that's not necessarily great. It really limits what you can go choose from a consumer standpoint, but it does bolster the California wine industry. So that's a really good idea there of how it can really help some industries and how it could really hurt some consumers. And I think in general, when we look back, there's an appropriate amount of tariffs, and we can look back historically and see, wow, when all of a sudden we start buying these really cheap products from China, it really put a lot of American businesses out of work here. It'll put a lot of it cost Americans a lot of jobs and a lot of manufacturing there. I think we might be able to go back and look back at that time period and say, you know what? The government could have stepped in and done a few more things here to help protect those industries and to help protect those jobs than what they did. And now we look at it and it's almost irreversible, right? We didn't do enough then. It's not like if we slap a 50% tariff on China that all of a sudden all those manufacturing jobs are going to move back to the United States. They won't. They might move to other countries here, which is a huge point because now all of a sudden we are affecting domestic policy there. And we're saying, hey, China, we don't like how you are exporting everything to us, not importing anything, stealing our technology, seemingly at war. We're not going to like how you're pressuring Taiwan here. And so all of a sudden, we are going to impose a massive tariff on you. And what that would do is over time, it would make people move to other countries to import from other countries there on that. So that is, in a nutshell, whether tariffs are good or bad really does depend. Now, the problem with it, and the reason that economists cannot stand it, and I studied free market economics, which basically states that when let me sum up 4 years and $100,000 of an economics education for you. Free market economics says, hey, when the governments get involved, things get messed up. And there's nothing that is more involving from a government than imposing a tariff. Now, I think it's important for us to realize who imposes tariffs. Okay, how do tariffs get imposed? And we're going to go and do a little bit more of a history lesson here, but we do not need Congress to pass a tariff. Matter of fact, it was a nightmare when they did. We're going to talk about that here a little bit as we look back into history on which tariffs worked, which tariffs didn't. The president can unilaterally leverage tariffs. Unilaterally. Really no checks and balances on there. Obviously, the president or the president's party wants to be reelected, so they want tariffs to go well here. So that is certainly a check and balance right there. But in general, we don't, Congress doesn't have to approve it. There's nothing that needs to be done. President can snap his finger on day one, which I think is January 22nd or so. Snap his finger on day one, and boom, tariffs are imposed. And that's why he has already gone out and say, we are going to do a flat tariff on Mexico and Canada of 25%. We might bump tariffs on China up to 50%, right? And that is why economists are reeling here. So why do they not like it? Well, first of all, most economists don't like it when governments get involved here. Second of all, the downwind effect of these. Once again, let's go back to the steel, because that was Trump's big tariff the first time around, tariffs on steel. Did it help the steel industry? A little bit. Did it help bring jobs back? Maybe a little bit, right? But in general, it really made building a car a lot more expensive here. So the downwind effect is, okay, now all of a sudden automobile makers are once again charging more per car, pass that on to the consumer here. And I think one of the challenges that you're going to find is that when we go to bring these jobs back and bring industrialization back to America here, what you're really unfortunately going to find is that a lot of those jobs are going to be taken back up with automation, with technology here, right? So that's number one, is that, okay, how much tariffs would we actually have to levy on other nations to bring the jobs back here to America? right? All right, well, if all of a sudden we're making it in America because these tariffs have to be so much that it's now cheaper to make this product in America. All right, well, what does that mean? That means that the cost of goods are going to skyrocket. The cost to the consumer is really going to go up, right? And that is not only problematic at every point in time, but it's super problematic right now when we are battling inflation. Inflation is an enemy. I would call it enemy number one right now, right? And we have enemy number one on the ground, pinned, and we are waiting for the 3 count to beat inflation, and it can roar. But that being said, like a WWE match here where they bounce back up off the mat, do a little Hulk Hogan right here where he's coming back up. Inflation is such a beast to truly suffocate. As a matter of fact, if you go back and you look at the inflation during the Jimmy Carter era, which he's so known for, rest in peace, Jimmy. All right, what you're going to see is that there was 2 bouts with inflation. The first bout, and then it calmed back down, and then they did not kill it, and it spiked back up. And that second spike was really what did not only the Carter administration in, but frankly, the U.S. economy in for a long time there. And that is what the Federal Reserve and a lot of economists are super concerned about now is just when you think you have inflation beat, it can rear its ugly head. And the second wave is always more damaging because a lot of people have already spent through their savings. They're just waiting. They're just trying to buy time. And when they think that it's about over and it rears its ugly head again, my goodness. So that's why economists are so scared about these tariffs and why the Federal Reserve is likely to pause raising interest rates until they see what Trump actually does with this, right? So that is why the economists really don't like it. Number one is the downwind effect, the unrealized consequences, unintended effects of putting in tariffs into other, you might put it on the steel, but it may affect something, it may affect building, right? And building buildings here later on. The second thing that we just talked about here is the overall inflation and how it is really a tax that's paid for by the consumers in America. And the third thing is a trade war, right? Just because you put on a tariff on Canada, don't think that that's a domestic thing. Canada is going to fight right back, right? So there's a great story with the Smoot-Hawley tariffs where there was 800 tariffs in there. And so let's talk about this. Let's just go right on into historical examples here. All right. So let's start before Smoot-Hawley. There was a tariff in 1816. Basically, the United States was trying to become its own country here in 1816, and they wanted to tax British imports here, and they really want to just drive American industry here. I think that you can maybe say that that's a tariff that made a lot of sense right there. Okay, a tariff that probably worked. Some of the tariffs on China, right? Listen, I realize the Democrats are really hitting Trump on these tariffs, but they did nothing to stop the tariffs that he put in place the first go around. As a matter of fact, they raised the tariffs on China, right? So there are good uses and needed uses for tariffs here. That being said, the next tariff here is what we are going to really look at, and that's the famous one in Benstein. That's the Smoot-Hawley tariff, for which both Smoot and Hawley eventually got kicked out of Congress for passing. And this is a reason that the president makes the tariff laws right now, because when Smoot-Hawley did this in 1930, they were at the very end of a lot of prosperous, the roaring 20s, about to enter the Great Depression. As a matter of fact, a lot of the work for Smoot-Hawley was done prior to the Great Depression. And then when it finalized, man, it really threw gas on the flames. And I think that's where and led the U.S. into further recession. I think that's where they're really afraid of with these new tariffs that are being floated about, is that, hey, we're almost at the tail end here of inflation here. This is going to ignite it. So what happened with Smoot-Hawley is that they really wanted to protect agriculture here. So they started off with wool and agriculture. And then all of a sudden, I'm just going to make some up. The senator from Nebraska is like, well, we need protection on corn here. And the senator from Georgia is like, well, we need it on cotton. And all of a sudden, all these industries wanted this protection that they may not have even needed. A lot of them didn't even import, stuff from, no cotton was really probably being imported from overseas, but cotton still wanted that protection in order to vote and pass this. So 1,000 economists got together, say, guys, hey, listen, this might be one of the first times in American history that we've done this, but it's not the first time in history. This is not going to end well. We're going to have so many unintended consequences. And it turns out that these ivory tower elitist economists actually knew what the heck they were talking about, right? So I realized that the experts have a really bad name right now, but in general, everything that those 1,000 economists predicted of what would go wrong went wrong. Now, it didn't cause the Great Depression. I think most economists agree on that, but man, certainly did not help it. So after that, they said, you know what? After all this pork, all of a sudden this thing smelled a lot like bacon in the morning here with all the pork and have everybody getting their own tariff in there. Shoot, there was even a tariff on goldfish, right? There was one person that was at a goldfish farm and they were able to work that in. They basically said, we're going to give this to the power of the president. And in general, that's been a really good move. And partly because we really haven't had much tariffs here. Now, that being said, what we can do now is get oddly specific about tariffs, for instance, on agriculture and on steel. Now, one of the stories from the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act is that uh, basically we went, I think, I want to butcher the numbers here, but we went from like a 7% tax on imported eggs from Canada to 10%. And we were bringing in about 1 million eggs from Canada, 1 million cartons of eggs. And when we did that, what did Canada do? Canada responded, and Canada was only charging us 3% on eggs that we were exporting over there, and they raced to match it at 10. So we went from selling 1 million dozen of eggs every single year to like 13,000 dozen eggs, and that is the challenge here. Free trade in general is going to be better for everybody over time here, and when you get these tariffs involved, all of a sudden it's a tit for tat game of chicken right here. Who's going to blink first? And the only people that really lose at the end of the day are me and you, right? So that comes to one point that I want to emphasize here. We're going to ask, what should you do right now? You shouldn't do anything. You should not do anything. And the reason being is that what the Federal Reserve, I believe, is looking at here is that are these talks of tariffs, are they actually lip service? Is he really going to do them? Right. So he said on day one, he's going to put a flat tariff on Mexico and Canada of 25%. That being said, I think that these are excellent negotiating ploys here. What does he want from Mexico? He wants immigration to stop. He wants them to take more of an active role in stopping that. He wants drugs to stop coming over the border, right? Well, hey, if you put a 25% tariff on Mexico, all of a sudden, they have a huge incentive here to help us stop those. What does he want from Canada? Maybe to become, you joke, to become the 51st state. That is not what he wants, right? But I'm certain that there's things from other countries that he wants. Maybe it's oil, maybe it's something else, maybe it's also immigration. Who knows, right? But by throwing this threat out there, they are all of a sudden on their heels and are going to be more willing to play ball. But in general, at the end of the day, free trade is what's best, particularly with your neighbors here. So in the past, we had the NAFTA, North American Free Trade Association. Then Trump reworked it here with Mexico and Canada. And I've got a feeling that we're going to be very close, if not 100% free trade between these two countries. But there are some things that we need them to do, right? There are some things that we need Mexico to get better at here, right? So, those are some examples, and that's a historical example here, the Smoot-Hawley tariff of why economists hate tariffs and why the president has unanimous power over those tariffs. There's also some really bad ones here. We'll talk about the Tariff of Abominations in 1928. So it was intended to protect northern industries and ended up alienating southern industries there. I'm certain that that eventually sparked and led to some frustration, maybe that divided the North and the South and may have led, to the Civil War many years later, right? Obviously, one of many things there. And then we also have things like the steel tariffs of 2002. That was during the Bush administration. Once again, same exact thing, trying to protect the steel industry. Well, what ends up happening? Well, all the other industries, get hurt. So it's almost a game of whack-a-mole when you're placing tariffs here, right? Hey, we're going to help this one, but man, all of a sudden, all these other moles pop up, and now we got, and that's the slippery slope of a tariff right there. All right, so let's talk about what Trump's proposing in the industries that are most effective. And so we're actually going to go back here and look. And so the big one that he was trying to affect here was the steel industry. Now, once again, you cannot talk about this stuff without talking about politics. Why would Trump want to protect the steel industry? Well, the Rust Belt is what won him the election in 2016 and most recently in 2024, right? Those Midwestern states have a good amount of electoral votes. So if you're trying to get Pennsylvania as a swing state, what are you going to do? All right, um, you're going to talk about how you're going to protect their industry there, right? Because these steel towns, once they shut down, they really don't come back, right? Once they leave, it's really hard to get them back there. And if if you ever seen a steel town that's past its heyday, it's not a good sight, right? So if you want to capture that state in their electoral votes, you are going to play to them. Now, us down here in Georgia, that doesn't really affect us, right? We don't really care about this all that much. Yes, we're going to pay a little bit more for our cars when we when we go to buy a car, but it's not going to be a terrible amount much per car on this, right? So in general, it's a great way to pander to the audience and get some votes, right? All right, so it may have helped the steel industry a little bit here. It definitely made cars more expensive. And just in general, the overall impact on this stuff, as we mentioned, is kind of minimal here. As a matter of fact, there was one study I noticed or I heard about where it said that the Trump tariffs were added about two to $300 of extra tax per person per year, right? So when we spread it out, it's probably not going to be something that you noticed overnight. So that gets us to, hey, what should you do? How do these tariffs actually affect you? All right, well, they will affect you. They will affect you slightly. It might change where your products are coming from. And so once again, it might go from if we levy a 50% tariff on China and we don't levy something on Mexico, all of a sudden all your products might be made in Mexico, which honestly I would argue is a really good thing. It might be a little bit more expensive to make in Mexico, but now all of a sudden we might have a stronger neighbor with more jobs to offer its citizens and more opportunity to offer its citizens. That may really help us with the immigration on down the line. If they can find opportunity in these countries to make a good living, they're probably not going to make the trek to illegally get into America. Maybe not, right? And so if we can use tariffs maybe to direct where these goods are being made from all the way in China to someplace like a neighbor in Mexico or in Central or South America, not only are you making that country stronger, but you're also cutting down on the shipping cost because it doesn't have to go on a boat and the shipping time, right? So there's some really cool things that we could do there. Now, how does that affect you? Once again, let's just say making goods in Mexico is more expensive than China. You're going to have to pay a little bit more for your goods. And when you're going to notice that on not immediately, but over time. Why is this such a big deal? Well, I've talked to you about this right now. Inflation is such a massive deal. Look at your food budget. You're spending twice as much as you were 4 years ago, and you're eating the same things, right? So if we were to all of a sudden be taxed on agricultural inputs that we're bringing in from other countries, right? Now all of a sudden, shoot, now maybe it's 3 times as expensive as it was 4 years ago, right? And so at a time of heightened inflation, every single penny does matter. It does affect us, and you can believe that the Democrats are going to be counting up every single cost increase and attributing it to the tariffs that are being imposed here, right? So that's how these will affect you. What can you do about them? Could it bring a job back for you? Maybe, probably not. Maybe, right? But what can you do here to really get ahead of this? So number one, I would tell you this. I highly don't recommend you getting ahead of this. I highly recommend that you, frankly, just play the game that's ahead of you, right? So, should you go buy a car here in 2025 before these tariffs kick in? I mean, maybe not. Who knows, right? We don't even know if he's serious about these tariffs, right? We don't know what that would do. I would think that, if a car dealership is running a really good interest rate or running a good deal off the MSRP, that may offset the extra $200-300 that you may pay on a car. Who knows, right? On this. So now that being said, if you're a company, and I've heard about this, right? So individually, I think you just sit tight. I hate to say it, but you're just gonna have to bite the bullet when the bullet comes, right? It's not like you're gonna go stock up on food for a long time because agricultural prices might go up. Now, there will be industries that are hurt other than more than others. Maybe there's some things that you can do, maybe a car being an example of buying that, right? Now, that being said, if you're a business owner and you really rely on this product from China, and it's the cheapest place that you can go get this product from China, I've heard of countless stories of businesses that are going ahead and buying as much stock as they can right now. And by the way, the companies are pushing this message, right? Hey, buy all this stuff from us here before the tariffs kick in. So it's really helping boost Chinese businesses and other companies' businesses, right? For instance, if you're a wine shop and you specialize in Bordeaux's, you're probably thinking about buying a full year or two supply of Bordeaux's, and you might be using a lot of your extra cash to go ahead and get ahead on these things, but there's only so much cash that you have on that, right? So for a business that is really reliant on products from outside the US, heck yeah, there's real good reason to be proactive there because worst case scenario is that you got an extra supply of Bordeaux's that are in the cellar, okay? And you got to pay maybe a little bit extra for storage of those, right? It's not like they're going to go bad on there, right? So now that being said, once these get implemented, what do we got to do? We have to be able to adapt, right? In this world, we have to be adaptable. This world has changed so much in the last 5 years, right? And it's one of those. I love the saying. It's changed faster than ever. Changes faster than ever, but slower than it will ever be. Right. Well, I don't know if that's the case because the last 5 years have been really unique here, but we have to adapt to the environment. For your great example here, eating, right? Your food, eating out is so much more expensive than it was because it's at the intersection of everything inflationary, of transportation costs, food costs, wage pressures, right? Going and eating out, there is no more $10 lunch, it's $20. There is at dinner, there's no more $20 pork chop, it's 30, right? If it's not 50 to 100% more expensive, right? And so and then my pet peeve is when you have somebody deliver that food to your front door and then we got to tip them and pay an extra fee. Anyways, long story short, here is that we've got to adapt. And so one of the things I've really challenged my clients with is saying, hey, let's buy in bulk, let's cook in bulk, let's have leftovers always in the fridge, let's have easy meals always in the fridge. We cannot really control the price of an apple or the price of a chicken, right? That being said, we can do our best to shop thriftily and eat in. That's the biggest thing, eating in. That's the biggest thing that we could do to affect our food budget. All right. Well, how does that apply to tariffs? Well, hey, if all of a sudden food costs go up, it's going to make it just even more important, right? Now, a couple other things we can do is we always buy local, right? I don't know about you, but whenever I go to the farmer's market, it's a fun activity that costs me an ungodly amount of money, right? So we could buy local. And so I'll also say this, like grocery stores are going to put out local product because if they are going to be paying extra for the cost, they're going to look for the lowest cost one. So that might just be automatically done for you, but we could buy local, seek alternatives, right? So obviously if, once again, French wine goes up, let's go to a cab, right? Or if French wine goes up, let's go look at an Argentinian Malbec. Oh, we did a 25% tariff across the board in Argentinian Malbecs. All right, let's go out there and let's look for an Oregon Pinot Noir or a California Cab here on that, right? Wait it out. All right, so here's another thing we do. We just wait, all right? So in general, I do think that these are leverage points. These are negotiating tactics. There might be, as Trump's promised, a 25% flat tariff on Canada on day one. That being said, the idea of it staying there is really hard to imagine for a long-term period of time. So we can just kind of play this by ear here. And then let's just stay informed. All right. So let's stay informed. You're going to know which, products are going to go up and which products that we may want to wait on. If you've got to buy a car, you got to buy a car. But if we can wait a year or two, maybe. But what happens is that these manufacturers will find cheaper companies to make it in that aren't being charged a tariff tax. And now all of a sudden, price of the car might come back down, right? So long story short, that is, we just covered, hey, what are tariffs? It's a tax. It's a tax that me and you will be passed on to me and you, right? Why do economists hate it? Because economists don't like it when the government gets involved with free market trade. In general, globalization has been really good. Right now, globalization's got a bit of a dirty word to it, though, right? So we're seeing a lot of more protectionist speaking and laws, and this is just one of them, protecting the American industry right here. Now, the biggest thing, though, is the downwind effect. What is this one tariff? How many other industries is it going to negatively affect by helping save one of those? And then also trade wars. Hey, what are they going to do to retaliate? Because they will retaliate, right? And we found that it doesn't necessarily affect behavior. For instance, we put a lot of well, one of the things we talk about, we put a lot of tariffs on China, right? Well, it didn't really work, right? And it really didn't affect their behavior one bit. We started a trade war, and it was like who'd blink first. And it turns out nobody blinked. Now, that being said, that was done in Trump's first term, and then Biden extended them and then raised them, actually, right? So I think that we're going to see that, hey, it may not affect the country, but it may affect the companies and where they source their products here, right? We looked through the history, particularly the Smoot-Hawley tariff, which is the most famous one, and that's another reason economists don't like this, right? And then we talked about, hey, what industries will this affect most here, and what can you do ahead of time? Individually, I would just wait and see. If you need a car, let's go ahead and get a car probably, right? Other than that, let's wait and see, and let's just be adaptable and know that these tariffs are going to come to some extent here, and it could raise prices. And obviously, once again, that's going to put pressure on the Federal Reserve to pause the lowering of their interest rates here. So, hey, hopefully this was helpful. Once again, I'm not an expert on these tariffs, but I do find them fascinating. We will see what happens here. And if y'all have any questions, feel free to reach out.